Right, colleagues, I believe I'm online, so there we are. Great. I would just like to, on behalf of SAIA Practice, welcome all SAIA members and friends of SAIAshare, and especially those who are attending this event for the first time. You are most welcome, and it's a privilege to be able to share with you what we've lined up for the next half an hour. We have a record subscription for this event. I don't know whether it's the topics or the lack of work, but nevertheless, you are most welcome. My name is Eugene Barnard. I'm a member of the SAIA Practice Committee, and I'll be your host this afternoon. With me as host, we have Gillian Ardendorf from the Eastern Cape. Welcome, Gillian. Thank you for joining me. And then we have Corina Gibson from ECPD, who is really the pillar of strength for SAIAshare. Without Corina, the SAIAshare would not be possible. Just so that you can celebrate with us, this is our 10th SAIAshare event. We started in about April, May last year, and apart from January, which we don't present SAIAshare. SAIAshare has a run on the first Friday of every month since then. And please remember, when you've received your salary, your paycheck, it's nearly time for SAIAshare. It runs on the first Friday of every month. Right, today in session 2, we are going to have 2 special guests, Fiona Garson and Nina Cohen with us. They will be sharing with us about their work at Saul Plaatje University, but Gillian will do the introductions a little later. And so it is my privilege to welcome Tim Holmes and introduce Tim to you. He's a senior partner with SAIDA, and he will be sharing some pivotal concepts with us. Tim holds a master's degree in business administration from the University of Cape Town, Graduate School of Business. He also has a Bachelor of Science Honours in Engineering from the University College in London. Tim understands business, and he will be sharing his knowledge with us in a clear, understandable way that architects, and especially architects, can understand. I heard Tim speak last year, and may I say my only regret is that I didn't hear him speak 40 years ago. And that is why we've invited him to be with us. Remember, you can put your comments and questions in the questions box. We will have a Q&A session after Tim's presentation and address hopefully some of the questions that will crop up. So, Tim, I'm happy to hand the mic over to you. All the best.
Can you see that? Good. Oh, thank you. And you probably wouldn't have wanted to hear me talk on this topic 40 years ago, because I don't think I would have known very much about it. So just fill in some gaps. So I've been with SAIAshare since 2013, sitting on 4 different boards at the moment. And for the last nearly 10 years, 9 years, basically been focusing on doing whatever I can to help boards improve their processes, improve their effectiveness, and basically add value. But what we want to talk about today is really how, particularly as an architectural company, you can build something that's potentially scalable if you want that, but also just think a little bit more about what the succession planning component is. In other words, how are you going to create wealth for yourself, a legacy that you can pass on to your children or the other people that you want to hand the business over to in the most effective way that's relevant to you and relevant to the way that you want to run your practice. So what we want to talk about is this sort of whole concept of the difference between building a craft business and what we call an enterprise. And they are very different, and I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. But just to show you this picture, if you look at the one on the left of the couple running their food stand, it's in our minds, it's obvious that that's like a one-man show, a two-man show, it's a craft kind of business. And the McDonald's is the enterprise version of that food stand. It's global, you've got thousands of people who own franchises in McDonald's, and it's a big company. What we don't often understand is that even with a fairly small business and in completely different industries, there's still this concept of craft versus enterprise. So it's really about understanding, first concept to get across is what game are you playing? So the game that you can choose from are solo games. So you can play golf, you can play tennis. They rely very much on you and your ability to win the game. Whereas a team sport like a rugby or a hockey or a cricket is much more about everybody working together to achieve the outcome. So this is the same kind of concept we were trying to talk about in craft versus enterprise. So the first thing to choose when you're thinking about what game you're playing is, are you playing a single sport, a solo sport, or are you playing a team sport? And then that filters down into the financial choices you need to make as part of your business choice. So thinking about the game, what are the fundamental differences? As I said, if you're playing a solo sport, it's entirely reliant on you. So you go onto the tennis court, may have a partner, but you go onto the tennis court, and whether you win or lose, whether you get the payout at the end of the day is entirely reliant on you and your luck, your skill, your ability in that moment, in that game. And a business is quite similar in that if you are the person who runs the business, it's your ideas, and very much in the creative space, the consulting space, that's so true that we have the ideas, we bring them into the business. We started the business because of our passion for sharing and creating something beautiful, but most of it's in us. It's all about us. And the sports is very similar, that the single sport, it's all about you. You have a team of supporters, but it's all about you. Whereas the team sport, like if you think about a rugby match, if someone's injured, they go off and they get replaced by someone else. So a business that's set up like an enterprise is very similar. It's not reliant on individuals. If someone's off sick, someone's off on holiday, the whole business doesn't grind to a halt. Someone else can take over, even if it's just for a short period of time, and handle that role and get the job done. So just maybe think about the concept of craft versus enterprise. If it helps you to frame it in terms of games and what are the outcomes of games based on solo sports and team sports, then hopefully that's helpful. But if we look at it from a business perspective, the way a craft business typically shows up is it's the way businesses mostly start. So someone starts a business based on their skill and ability, their passion, their willingness, their objective to share something with other people, hopefully for them to pay for it as quickly as possible. But it's usually down to one or two, maybe three individuals who take this business out into the market, and they're doing it based on their skill and ability. And crafts businesses are exactly that. It's your ability to get that thing right, to craft that thing, to make that beautiful, to make it saleable, to make it valuable. Where it's not so obvious is when you get into the space of a business where you've got maybe 5, 10, 15, even more people, but the mindset is still like a craft. We haven't changed the mindset from it being all about the founder or founders. So typically, if you think about businesses like a doctor's practice or a dentist practice or a legal practice, our small architectural firms, particularly when you're starting out, it's still, even though you've got more people in the team, it's still very much focused on that founder energy, on that founder's ability. What we want to try and move towards and think about is that what I want to do? Is that the type of business I want to build? Because you can make money doing it, as I'm sure most of you have experienced, if not all of you, hopefully. You can make money doing that, but it is a particular game. It's a particular way of playing this game called business. Whereas if you want to move to this thing called enterprise, it's a different game. So most SMEs start off, as I said, as a craft, and then they build from there. But you need to try and make this decision about whether you want to continue as a craft or move to being an enterprise as soon as you possibly can. Because as I said, the game rules are different. If you start playing like a solo player in a team sport, eventually people get fed up, and if you get to a certain level, they kick you out because it's just disrupting the team's performance. And again, business is very similar. So what's the distinction? Being a craft is all about your own knowledge, utilizing your own knowledge in your craft and then sharing that knowledge with your team. And effectively, it's about owning a job, because that business of itself does not have significant value. If we take the founder or founders out, there's very little left to pass on, because all of the skills, the abilities, the processes, all of that stuff is still in the heads of the founders. So if you want to continue to do that craft, that's what really fires you up, to do that really special stuff, that molding, that crafting, that producing something beautiful, then build a business knowing and understanding that you're building a craft, and build your legacy knowing and understanding that you're playing that game. And that's really about earning as much as you can per hour, working as many hours as you can, leveraging your time as much as you can by having a team that supports you, but understanding that there's no point in leaving the money in the business unless it's for working capital, because the wealth isn't being created in the business. The wealth is you. So you need to take those dividends, take those salary payments, and put them somewhere else. Create an asset of value somewhere else, whether it's property, whether it's a share portfolio, whether it's classic cars, your choice about where you put it. But understand that's the game of a craft, that's the game of a solo sport. Because as soon as you stop, there's a risk, and a massive risk in most cases, that the business will stop. It just ends there. So if you get sick, if you decide you want to retire, if for some other reason anything else happens, you die, then often that business, if it's not structured like an enterprise, collapses, because all the decision making, all of the IP is in the head of the person who's no longer there to run it, and people go their separate ways. So it can be a massively valuable way of building a business. It can be the way you want to operate. That's the passion you have, is to do that craft and be that craftsperson. But just understand that that's the game you're playing. So play by those rules and create wealth by those rules. Whereas an enterprise is much more about a team. May initially not look much different from a craft, but where it starts to become apparent quite quickly is, who do you employ next? And then the person after that. Do you employ someone who is less able than you, that either is going to support you, or your objective is to teach them and bring them up? Or do you bring in someone who's better than you at something that you don't enjoy doing? So in your mind, have you already realized that there's an organogram you need to build? Yes, I've set this business up. Yes, I'm the MD right now, but actually, I'd far rather be the head of operations, or I'd far rather be the head of sales in the ultimate organization. So if I'm going to move to there, now which role do I need to replace as quickly as possible? Maybe that role that you need to replace is the MD or CEO. So get it done early, get it done, and move into the space where you're really going to add value. And that's the enterprise thinking. So as I said, it can be quite difficult to do retrospectively, because you need to unpack a whole bunch of things which have been, baked into the way this business operates. But if you want to build a business that acts like an enterprise, that has a value in and of itself, it is a juristic person, it is a company, then you need to think about how you're building everything with a team mindset. So it's building a bigger business. It gives you capacity to do that because you're less reliant on individuals. You can bring in more team members. You can bring in hierarchy under those team members. You can maybe merge with other practices to form that company. Otherwise, or you can build the company yourself and bring in other partners. However you want to do it, that's the sort of thinking behind building based on a team concept rather than on a one-man show or a small group of founders concept. So the fundamental principle is an enterprise must be able to operate without the immediate involvement of the founder on a day-to-day basis. So if you can't take a week's holiday or 2 weeks holiday or a month's holiday, then the chances are there's still quite a lot of craft kind of constructs in your business. And as I said, it's a choice. Is that the way you want it to be? Then play that game. If you need or want to move to an enterprise, something you can leave as a legacy, then you need to start thinking about how do you build in backup? How do you build in succession planning? How do you bring people in who are better than you at that and better than you at that? So you build a broader team that can run the business without you. And the second principle is an enterprise must have its own significant value or potential for significant value and can grow and develop that value despite your non-involvement, death, or retirement of the founder. So that's really the critical thing. If you cannot keep going when you're not there, then you're running a craft. If the business actually does better when you're not there, and it gives you the opportunity to start something else, now you can say, okay, I think I'm getting to the place where I've got an enterprise, and that's what I want to do. And I want to move on to the next project or specialize in a particular area of this business that I've always enjoyed doing. And that's where I add value. So it has nothing to do with you. It's all about the team. The game rules are different. It's separate and distinct from you, and it requires shareholders, directors, and managers. So that's why I said a craft is very much like it should be potentially set up as a sole proprietor. It's actually more of a job construct, whereas an enterprise, that's when you start getting into the space where the hats of shareholder, director, and manager really start to make sense. They really start to add value. So in any business when you register a business, when you register a PTY Limited, the first thing you need to do is define who the shareholder or shareholders are, who the director or directors are, and if you don't have management, then you probably don't have operations, and it's not really a company. It's more of a shell company that you might own a property in. So right from the very beginning, you've already got those hats. But what we're not taught at school, we're not taught on MBAs or CAs, we're not taught at any of the professional degrees that I'm aware of about how to construct a business the way a business was meant to be constructed, which is to have a separation between the hat of shareholder, the hat of director, and the hat of management. Because the hat of a shareholder is distinctly different from the hat of a director. So as you can see from those two arrows, the shareholder hat is fundamentally much more of a selfish position because you've put money or time in to get the equity, and now you want some kind of return on your investment. That's fair. That's what the whole point of a shareholder is to put something in and then expect some kind of return over time for that investment. That's why we invest in listed companies on the stock exchange, etc. The role of being a director, though, is completely selfless. You are there as a director to do nothing else but what's in the best interest of the business. Define the strategy of the business. Make sure the processes and procedures are in place to run that business. Lead that business in a way that is in the best interest of the business. Not me, not you, not a friend down the street, not your sister, your brother. The business must be led in a way that it's in the best interest of the business. And the complicated one is management because you have a contract. So the contract tends to be a selfless engagement with the business, but the fact you're being paid some kind of remuneration, some kind of salary, tends to be more of a selfish engagement. So if you're wearing all three of those hats, and all of the shareholders and all of the directors and all of the managers are wearing the same three hats, then it's really, really difficult to utilize these teams effectively. But as soon as you can start to think about separating them, start to bring maybe independent directors or non-exec directors on the board to separate out those levels, now you can focus on a shareholder conversation, what return do we expect? A director conversation, what is the strategy for this business going forward? A management conversation, how do we implement that strategy? How do we get it done? So I hope that makes sense. And I've just put this in because it's a really common misconception. A business is a being, it's a fiduciary entity. So you can't, a juristic person is the word I was grappling for. You can't own a juristic person. That would effectively be slavery. So you can't own a business. But unfortunately, in common language, we say, oh, that's my business, I own that business, etc. But fundamentally, you can't. That is an indication that you're still thinking of this as being yours, and that tends to be a craft kind of approach to running the business. If you're thinking about this is the team, this is the business I run, those kind of constructs, that kind of language, now you're moving into the enterprise space. So to close out, where are we going? Well, you need to understand what your promise is to the market. You need to have your vision set up. You need to have your mission about how you're going to deliver against that vision. And then you need to make a choice. You need to make a choice. Am I going to become or focus on being a craft, or am I going to become or focus on becoming an enterprise? And that's a crossroads. It's not a, and as you can see from a crossroads, once you've gone down one, you've got to do a lot of backtracking to get to the other. So it's all about, you want this, that risk, that excitement, that adrenaline rush of climbing solo, or would you prefer to climb as a team? So that's really my question to you, I suppose forcing you to think differently a little bit about your business, because the shareholder investor return, the director champions that promise and helps make sure that that promise is delivered by the company, and the manager brings it to life. So my question to all of you is, what game are you playing? Make sure it's really clear that you understand. Am I playing a solo sport or am I playing a team sport? And then once you've made that decision, start to think about, well, what does that legacy look like? Am I building it in the right way? Am I investing in the right places? Am I putting my time and effort into the right kinds of constructs that's going to build this thing and make this thing more resilient or valuable, whatever it comes from that? So thank you, that's me.
Great, thank you, Tim. That was once again very, very, very stimulating. And I'm just wondering whether there are those who, like me, have been running a business really pretty much by instinct for many years. Is there still time to go back and answer those questions? Why shouldn't I just carry on doing what I'm doing, Tim?
Yeah, I suppose my answer to that question is always a bit like, when's the best time to plant a tree? Well, now, or 100 years ago. So you start with what we've got, and you may never get there, but at least move in that direction. Typically, getting a board going and making that transition and start to break the teams apart is probably a 3 to 5 year process, depending on how entrenched it is in the organization. If you've got good processes, you've got good policies, your team have got good roles and descriptions set up already, and a lot of decision making is distributed around the organization, then it's obviously much easier. If no one's got really clear roles, it's all in your head, you tell them what to do, and all the decisions about where the money goes are, you know, you've got to sign for it or press some buttons, much more difficult. But it's, yeah, start with what you've got, but it's being deliberate rather than sort of drifting in a direction and then thinking, now why can't I retire, and I'm exhausted, I can't take any time off, and I don't know what to do, which lots of businesses that we talk to have got to that point of desperation, or someone has actually died and they're going, now what do we do? And the wife or the siblings or the children, whatever, inherited this thing. I don't know what to do. I've never been taught what to do. I've never someone have shared anything with me, and that's just such a waste of capital, of IP, of everything. People lose their jobs, people lose millions in rands in money. That's just crazy. So my mission is to try and do whatever I can to stop that happening if at all possible, because all too often it is possible to stop it.
Great. Gillian.
Just a point I'd like to make, I think for a lot of us, initially, a lot of people start, they have a sole practice, they've just got a sole proprietorship or whatever. And the next move used to be you opened a closed corporation. So you had a CC and we all functioned in CCs, then the CC stopped being a possibility. So you were actually pushed into, you needed to open a company. So you had to register companies, and everybody has a company. And I think that technically we haven't actually, maybe as architects, we haven't really thought about what you're saying. When you open a company, you're actually opening a different animal. And even though you follow all these things with your accountant and all of that, but you're actually stepping into the enterprise. And I think a lot of us haven't fully embraced actually what that enterprise is. And maybe a lot of us still hold on desperately. We sort of sometimes obsessive compulsive about, managing everything, which makes us less likely to move into an enterprise and more likely to stay in the craft, not because we don't want to be an enterprise, but because as architects, generally, we want to control everything. And I think that's sort of a big step for architects. And I think it's important from an educational point of view for us to understand what you're saying, because it is so important for us to be able to move, but maintain the what is the word I'm looking for? But sort of almost, we don't want to become driven and lose what makes us special. If you understand what I'm saying.
And you don't fundamentally need to change the output of the business. It's just the approach to running the business needs to be a little bit more formal. Mainly first is the whole cover your ass thing. If anything goes wrong now based on the current Companies Act, the fact that you are a director, or even the fact you are seen to be a director, in other words, you are making significant decisions in the business, whether you have got that title or not, you immediately become legally liable. The other piece is, if you can separate out the hats, you think differently. So if you have a shareholders meeting to say, right, what's the return I'm expecting from this thing I've set up, this business I've set up? Have we ever paid a dividend? Well, if not, why not? I've put all this money in, I've put all this time in, so what am I getting back with a shareholder hat on? Not thinking about any of the other aspects of it. And again, that's really difficult if all of the people in the room have all got all the hats, because then you start saying, oh, well, I better not say that because that was my fault, and if we'd done that, we would have grown more, or we'd be more profitable. And if that's when having, for example, some independent person who runs that meeting can help you step back and say, okay, if this was a JSE listed company and I've put R1 million in here, how much would I expect to have got back? And over what time period, etc. And if I can't work that out, then I need to work that out, because otherwise you may as well put the money somewhere else. If you've got a director hat on, it's about strategy. So thinking about strategically, where am I going, not operationally, what can I do?
Great. Tim, I just want to just answer or address some of the questions that are coming through now. It seems as if you have stimulated some thought. Daryl wants to know how to maintain an enterprise mindset as a one-man band before one is ready to start hiring a team, etc. So, right, one-man band, but how to maintain the enterprise mindset. Is there an easy answer?
So first step is to think, how do I do it? So fantastic. Second step is to try and find someone who can be at those levels other than you. So bring Granny in 10 Rand, you're now a 0.0001% shareholder of my business. Okay, Granny, once a year we're going to have a shareholders meeting. That forces you to think, well, what am I telling Granny about how much money she's making on her 0.001% shareholding? Now you're starting to think about it as a shareholder. You've suddenly had that, oh, wow, okay, I'm now thinking like a shareholder. You have a strategy meeting. Go to a coffee shop down the road and just write down, this is the strategy, this is what we're doing, this is the promise to the market, this is what's unique about me, this is what I'm selling out there, and have that session, but separate from where you normally work. And then every quarter, go to that coffee shop or go to that room or go to that other place and say, right, the strategy day today, I'll get my director hat on. And if you make a decision, just write it down, even if it's like a notebook. Say, on so-and-so day, I made the decision to do this, that, and the other, because what happens is you then forces you to think through why you're making the decision, and you can come back to it in 3-6 months time and say, oh, okay, well, that maybe wasn't such a good idea. I need to do differently better later.
Okay, Tim, thank you. I'm going to move on quickly. Mujahid wants to know, he says, after listening to you, I realize that we are running a solo game, even though there are many people working with us. We were advised to register a PTY, presumably a company, which is what we did. Was this a correct move?
Well, it depends on, so all you need to remember is, well, you're in a PTY situation now, so at least do the basics. At least write down decisions, important decisions you've made somewhere. At least think about having a directors meeting 3-4 times a year and actually just document a few decisions we've made to start formalizing. So if anybody questions anything down the line, okay, look, we wrote it down. More importantly, if you're not going to change the way you run the business fundamentally, it's really then you're just complying with the Companies Act. You're just thinking about good governance means that we have proper processes in place, that we have roles and job descriptions, we write down when we make a decision. That's enough to cover the law. And then you can decide whether you want to take it to the next level.
Great, thanks. Next question, apart from the obvious need, sorry, Gillian.
Yeah, Tim, sorry, Eugene, I was wondering, should we maybe in terms of time actually just make a comment there from Brendan? Great talk. Any books that you could recommend to keep the mind going, keep your mind on the game plan? And I think we have a slide letter which will answer that specifically and give you an opportunity to actually find out more about this. So that's a quick answer for Brendan. I think Eugene wanted to pick up Vera's question.
Yes, okay, well, let's just, there's a question from Vera. Apart from the obvious need to skill and task share, if you choose the craft route, what are the recommended policies to have in place to aid in points of failure, which might be short-term, example, sickness, disability, and aid in allowing the craft to run to a degree until the founder can get back into it? So if you're running a craft, what safety nets do you need?
Well, yeah, I think this comes back to good business practice, regardless of what kind of business it is. Have some kind of guidelines that people can follow. Doesn't matter how small the business is. In fact, as soon as you have your first employee, think about what your sick leave policy is. Think about what have you given them enough information, or have you documented something so they can back you up if you're not there? You know, how do they do the banking, or not so much banking, but if there's another process they need to run because you're not in the room, write it down. Here's the process, you know. So I think that's the best way of covering it. You're not going to be able to cover the big things like doing the designs and talking to clients.
Okay, Tim, we have to wrap up now. Just Gillian's last question, the question that came through from Brendan regarding books that you recommend. I have two right in front of me. I don't know whether you want me to show them, but what are your recommendations?
They are the best books ever, of course. Uh, so there's laws of extreme business success, which was written specifically to talk about this sort of craft-based enterprise and making the shift. Nice, thin, quick read. You can just read it by chapter, not too heavy. Things like E-Myth Revisited, those kind of things that talk about a lot about creating a franchise. It's the same kind of concept. If you can build a business in such a way that you could sell the concept to someone else, effectively you're building an enterprise. The same kind of process, same kind of mechanisms. And Traversing the Avalanche is very much, I want to be in an enterprise, I want to find out more, I want to find out about how I should become a director. And this one was forward written by Mervyn King. So it's right up there in terms of best thinking at the moment.
Great. Tim, thank you very much. And we're going to move on. Gillian, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim. I think that we are very, very happy to introduce Fiona Garrison and Nina Cohen. Thank you very much, ladies. You are an excellent team for us to introduce. So Fiona and Nina started their company together in about 15 years ago. They started a partnership. They are both exceptionally talented and wonderful ladies. I had a discussion with them the other day. They started their business by actually initially doing a competition together. And this was the BIT school, and successfully won the competition and have since then gone on to win many further competitions and work successfully together. They are not a large company. They're a small company. They are 2 directors and 5 people in total, and then bring in other additional specialists when they need them. But as you can see, the 2 ladies sitting there, you can see they work closely together. They do everything, they make every decision together. They're a strong, strong design team. They are passionate, extremely passionate about what they do. And they are really passionate about creating a legacy in the education. They have an extensive knowledge and a fantastic CV of a tremendous amount of wonderful projects that they have undertaken. So without further ado, thank you both for agreeing to tell us these exciting projects that you're working on, and we're so happy to have you on board. So I'm going to just introduce, that's Fiona and Nina on the other side. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. I'm going to turn my camera off. Thank you to everyone for listening to us today. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to share this winning competition entry that Nina and I did for Sol Plaatje University. As Gillian said, Nina and I have really built our practice on winning competitions or tenders. This was a particularly interesting one for us just because of the sort of magnitude of it and the citing of it, and also because it was anonymous. So just a message to young practitioners out there, small practices can compete with bigger practices, and I think we often have an advantage because we are small. So when Nina and I do enter a competition, it's the 2 of us working on it all the time. And I think it's such an opportunity for young design firms or older design firms to sort of enter the market and engage in very excellent projects. So this was a 2-stage competition. The image that you see is our proposal in the context of Kimberley. It sits comfortably in relation to the Luca Yankee building on the left, which is a competition, a winning competition building in itself, and the judiciary building to the right. It's a 2-stage competition, so it starts off with talking about design ideas, and then we move into the actual design of our building. But we want to contextualize everyone a little bit. Not everybody knows Kimberley, not everybody really knows about these extraordinary university projects that are unfolding. So this is an image that resonates so much with both Nina and myself. It's an old sand engraving. It's dated maybe 500 to 1,000 year old. And there's something exquisite about the way the sort of scarifications and the peeling away of the layers and to reveal something new with meaning resonated with us as we began to think about our project. So Kimberley today looks like this. It is hot and dry and very flat. It, everybody knows about the big hall. This is the kind of city centre. SAIAshare is, typical of every South African city, the great divide between, the inequality of the South African city is typified in Kimberley as with other cities. And there at the bottom, we see the Malay camp, which is the kind of, it came about when diamonds were discovered and was a very rich organic environment, and it was erased. And our site sits right on top of that. So the kind of meaning and the sort of almost sacred nature of the site we were given to look at was really inspiring for us. So Kimberley is an interesting place. You walk along and you see one of the best examples of Victorian architecture that you could ever hope to see. You see beautiful, well-built, well-designed modernist buildings using brick screens, beautifully articulated. And this is the Looker Yankees building, which is inhabited by the university. It's a beautiful courtyard building designed by Jack Barnard, probably in the 60s, could be the early 70s, dealing with climate through courtyard and very sort of inspiring architecture. And then came the contemporary layer, which we now have in Kimberley, which is the new university. So for those of you that haven't been there, this image is taken from the top of the main new library, looking northwards towards the city of Kimberley. And these buildings have their own language. They're very sensitive to climate. They're very massed. They have shading devices. They have colonnades, all sorts of elements that turn them into, appropriate structures for Kimberley and for the, the education mission. And that's the teaching faculty building designed by Henry Comrie, sits sort of in front of this field, very massed, beautiful building. And then this is buildings that are currently underway by Cohen & Garson. One is a sports pavilion, the one is a little staff conference center. And then back to the site. So this is the footprint of the Malay camp. When we started the competition, we were all given very excellent base information. It was during COVID, so we had to be able to not travel and to really understand what was being asked of us. So Ludwig Hansen, architect and urban designers, prepared the base information, and we were given this Malay camp overlay, which was the white outline shows the site that we're working on. So the Malay camp was demolished in the 50s to make way for the Oppenheimer Garden Park, which is a very kind of colonial, Europeanly designed space, which has a beauty of its own, but it has this sort of horrible history of removing traces of the past. So there's a drone shot showing the site, and it also gives me a chance to just explain this extraordinary campus that's been designed. So the campus is divided into the central campus. So that library photograph that I showed you was from this position with the central square. And this was the first phase of buildings that was done. And then we've moved on to South Campus, and there are other architects working on also competition winners who are working on buildings in South Campus. There's a lot of sporting facilities, and everything is beautifully stitched together through walkways and avenues and courtyards. And the North Campus is this portion of campus here, which is still to be developed. And that was this particular competition that we've won. We were given this site to work on. And I think what's important to note about this university compared to the one in Mpumalanga that's being built in Mbombela is how this one is stitched into the urban fabric and really has become and is creating a university town out of Kimberley. which is quite extraordinary to see unfolding. So now we're looking at Central Campus, and we're looking at our competition site. So specifically, this was the site we were given, but in the beginning, in the first phase of the competition, we were given just the Oppenheimer Garden site. And just to take you through images of it, so this is where the Malay camp, or portion of the Malay camp that was demolished is. This is the Workers' Fountain and the Oppenheimer Memorial in this position here. The fountain. The way the park is at the moment, it has a real beauty of its own, and it's a well-used park for many different communities in Kimberley. And there's the De Beers Diamond Building, it's an exceptional building as well, and it sits closely in relation to the park and the Looker Yankees building. And then the links, so you're standing at the far edge of the park looking back towards the new central part of the university. And part of our challenge with this competition was, how do we reinforce this link? Here are students, in fact, walking towards the university. And then from our site, probably the final position of the building, we look back at the Solplaatje Municipal building to the south. Then we started, we started thinking about the site and looking at the layers and trying to find meaning without knowing what building we would be designing. So we were interested in finding the traces of the past. Architects possibly draw to search for meaning, and we found, we became interested in these streets that actually emerged during looking at the figure ground, which was the Malay camp overlaid with the Oppenheimer Garden. And we looked at pathways and intersections. We looked at the given urban design and how the two circular elements to the east and the west would be eventually built up, and that the university, who really was given this park as a kind of, there was a search for an open space, and this park was actually offered to the university by the city. And I think the idea was that they would be good custodians of the park while keeping it absolutely open and accessible to everyone. And we looked at different layers, networks, and pathways. We became very drawn to the sort of landscape and the traces that we were picking up from our drone shots. And I'll just quickly take you through so that we can get into talking about the building. So this was the image we started with. If there is a couple of sentences just to describe what we conceptually were trying to do, I think this image shows it. We really never wanted to block access of people north to south. And we also came up with this notion of a very light, ephemeral building with a connection from earth to sky. And we'll talk further about how we designed that. So the first stage of the competition, for those people that didn't enter it, is that we are not given a building. We actually allowed 10 A4 pages in which to answer 5 questions. And what this does, and was particularly good for this project because there was so much richness around the site, it can be difficult to answer questions without designing. So memory as a spatial informant, I went through how we looked at all the traces and the histories and the layers of the past. And we started drawing and we started designing and we started just imagining, knowing that there would possibly be a building in this position and possibly a building in that position. How we would rethink the links, how we would rethink the urban design, and how we would memorialize what had gone before. And we found beautiful images of the mining tents and the Holy Cross Mission Church. And we started thinking about this notion of small pavilions, which could somehow be spread out through the park and have functions that would attract people. They could be small places to learn, they could be shaded areas for people to gather, they could be security pavilions. So we had this idea of scattering these pavilions, which would remind you of what had been there in the past and would somehow have a reference to the past. And we looked, at this point, we were looking at a very linear axis. Moving on, we looked at how we were asked to think about how can we really establish a handshake with the community? How do we pull the community in, and how do we, how do we make this a place that is a shared space while still a university space? And one thing that was very important for both of us, and I think this image typified it, is that once again, we wanted the ground plane to constantly flow so that there would always be interaction and never blockage at the ground level. And then we came up with this idea of the solar canopy. So Kimberley, the home of solar power, continual sunlight, and how this could be something that both created shade, harnessed electricity, and powered maybe outdoor little learning areas. And we also thought about linkage. So here, the link to the university was very important to us. And we picked up on one of the Malay blocks and created this almost transitional foyer zone that one would arrive at. There would be bicycle stands, seats, security, and that would then shift you to what we did, which is shift the axis from this park, from the center, to the eastern side of the building. And somehow that is an element that remained as we continued to develop the building. Also asked to look at the transformation and adaptation of tertiary teaching missions. So in a time of COVID, in a time where resources are scarce, how do we look at appropriate teaching spaces? How can they be shared? How can they be indoor, outdoor, particularly in a climate like Kimberley? And we explored in quite an abstract way how if you provide a structure that allows you to use grids in different ways so that you can make small spaces, large spaces, and we had this notion of ventilation coming through all underneath a canopy. And in this perspective here, you see these sliding screens which would allow you to learn and create spaces for different types of learning. The section below, we started looking at how you would program the bottom, how you would program the ground plane, which would mean that it could be an interface between the public and the university, and then you would have more private spaces above, all under, at this point, a solar canopy. And then climate is such a driver of building, typology really in this area, particularly because of the massive temperature differentials. That is like the desert. It is freezing in the morning and sort of scorching midday, and even in winter it can get really hot in the middle of the day and in the minuses at night. So it's how do you, our architect's responsibility anyway is to deal with orientation appropriately. And Nina and I have explored in a lot of our buildings how on the north side of the building one creates shading devices and one looks at creating airflows through the way you do your fenestration. We also obviously looked at how you harness water, how you can store it and reuse it and recycle it. And all those things become so important in making a truly sustainable building. And again, we became extremely inspired by the notion of the solar canopy and started seeing exquisite examples of it everywhere. We also we were asked to really look at different technologies. So moving away from bricks and mortar, how could we possibly look at timber as a method of construction? It's sustainable, it's being used more and more in South Africa, and how you can create modular units, which just give you a new way of thinking about buildings and their technologies. And then this stage ended off with us being asked to think about gatherings and celebrations. And we got a hint at this point that maybe we would be designing a hall. It would be about ceremony, procession, and we loved designing to such an extent that we designed a little building on the far north of the Oppenheimer Garden. And again, this image typifies the way we think about the space, that it is the sort of filter of people in and out of the park, in and on campus, and within the building, slightly less public gathering spaces, and this notion of procession through the site that could be shared by observers, that might just be the general public. And we found, yeah, similar precedents when we began looking further. And there ended the second stage, so the first stage of the competition. So a number of us then went through to compete for the second stage. And for the second stage, we had to produce no more than 6 A1 sheets, which really developed a design according to an extremely specific brief that we received. So we got a little bit surprised when we saw the brief, because given the size of the site we were given, we were asked to provide a hall of 2,000 square meters. So this notion that we had of floating the building had to disappear fast. And we had to think about, you know, how else could we design this building and not lose the principles that were so important to us, which was this ground plane permeability. And so we started designing, and we pulled a lot of things that we've been thinking about. We definitely kept the Eastern link. We liked the way that it connected to the central campus through the city. And we kept the idea of the canopy. We introduced the notion of tree columns that, you know, would support this canopy independently. And there would be then infill, which would hover to the north and the south as you entered the hall. And then these edges, strong brick edges, one of them housing the street to the east, and then this notion of, the street. We called it eventually the internal street, and this real flexibility at the ground plane. This talks about how we developed our little pavilions. We imagined them as solar powered. We imagined them as depicting a memory of the Malay camp in some way, just drawing people back into it. We thought a lot about how do you memorialize difficult pasts, and a lot of us scrambled with this and tried to do it through the way we use geometries. But I think Nina and I began to think it's about how you program spaces. It's how you make buildings accessible and meaningful to all people that are going to be using it. And here you see this internal street which pulls everyone, students and staff, into the building. The pavilions were inspired by this little industrial park that we found in Sydney, so integrated beautifully into the landscape with seating areas and power zones, etc. And we imagined something similar. So to go through our programming quickly so that we can get into the plans. Obviously, our assembly hall, our big hall, our multifunctional flat hall would take up the bulk of the services of the building. Then to the east, we had the stage area with the backstage. Then we had what we call our street foyer, where we had exhibition, security, information, foyer and lounge. Merchandising, we were asked to provide a coffee shop and a kind of merchandising, university merchandising store. And then academic offices, a combination of open plan and closed offices, meeting rooms and a security office. And then ablutions, which you'll see how we dealt with ablutions, because it's mass ablutions, which can be tricky on the ground level. And then teaching spaces and services, which that's really our main service core, and services which we slipped under the stage on the east of the building. And a general circulation main staircase and lift, and to the far northeast, a fire escape and a second fire escape to the southeast. Okay, these were our second 2 pages where we started really looking at the plan. It was a tight site. We weren't able to expand much in any direction. But remember, for this competition, we were also asked to look at the south side of the building. So here we had this internal street, and we had this notion of steps to the north where people could sit from having got a coffee at the coffee shop, or simply just sit there during the day, and once again an expansive south gathering area. And I'll get into the plans in detail. So on this side, this little axo just shows quite nicely what we're dealing with. So over here, we were very lucky enough, remember, we raised the building. I'll actually go forward and just talk about this plan. So this level, which is our main floor level, is about just over 1 meter above natural ground level. So we were able, because of the raised stage and the raised floor level, to tuck our services neatly under the stage. And these services house things like chair stores, garbage collection, some staff ablution facilities, gown stores, and all the things that were back of house. And then on the ground floor, in our internal street, we housed the guardhouse security, an exhibition space, our merchandise shop. So we really imagined this being very, very active all day, and the possibility of closing it at night obviously is there. But a coffee shop that spills out there, services to the coffee shop at the back, and our big main grand staircase and lift. Access to the hall in a processional situation could also be through here. Whenever we draw these plans, we've drawn them with the doors open, because somehow for us it was about emphasizing the openness of the building. And then we had what we called a VIP entrance over there, and which takes you right onto the stage, ramp access onto the stage for ceremonies, graduation ceremonies particularly, and then a stage, an external stage, where we would imagine a protest could happen, or someone could be giving a speech, or just an outdoor public gathering possibility. Yeah, and then at stage we had green rooms, ablution facilities, and our fire escapes. Yeah. Okay, on this level, we have our grand staircase taking you up 1 level, where we tucked our ablutions into this level. We felt they shouldn't be on ground floor, but we felt they should be accessible. So here we have our set of ablutions, and you're looking really at the volume of the stage. We also have our parents' lounge at this level, which overlooks our internal street. Then at the top level, we had our academic offices to the north and to the south. On the north, they have little balconies which are screened by a continuation of our roof. And we should draw your attention also to these panels, which what we imagined as these timber acoustic panels, also voids in them to allow us for ducting where necessary. And on the top of the roof here, we had an external area which was for plant services, etc. We also have teaching spaces on this level, where we have 2 big 80-seater seminar rooms and 2 smaller seminar rooms. Yeah, so really that is how we responded to the brief that we were given. We did add an extra space in. We added our teaching, a possible outdoor teaching space or conference facility, which would give you these exquisite south views under cover from the roof. And really that is how we thought about the plan of our building. And then to talk about the internal street, so that's a view looking back to the coffee shop. This would be the exhibition area. This would be the parents' lounge. And then onto the roof. So we became very intrigued by the idea of harnessing the sunlight for this building. And we engaged with a really interesting consultant, person called Jason Cockrell, who particularly consults in quite an independent way about these kinds of roofs. And we really wanted to do a building integrated photovoltaic. So it's not just solar panels on the roof, it's where the roof is the solar panel. And he talked to us a lot about how we could do this. And we found, you know, there is a material that is available. It is it's made by a company called Onyx, but it has excellent thermal properties. It's able to come in various states of opacity so that it's not entirely transparent. Obviously, this is conceptual. An idea was this light transparency that we wanted to portray. And this is a building that actually Hilton Juden showed us after we had done our competition, but it resonated so much with us just in terms of its scale and the way it's used glass. And it's Renzo Piano's reimagining of the Moscow powerhouse, which was designed in the early 1900s. And it's now become a clean energy building, which is a sort of cultural center. And we just found it phenomenal. It even seemed to have a bit of an internal street and a roof like ours. It's a renovation, obviously, which is different. These roofs have been used extensively in Europe, but here's an example of it used in the I&M Bank, Nairobi, Kenya. It's 2,000 square meters of photovoltaic roof, which in time will really power the building or pay itself back, certainly. And there it is. Yeah. And then, you know, we were also, our last 2 pages, we were asked to look at, well, we chose to talk about technology and the servicing of the building and how we would do that and how we would create displaced ventilation systems, how our roof would work. And yeah, we really just got into the sort of materiality of the building. Over here, we looked, which I'll get into more detail, is the temporal nature of the building and how it could be used for so many different functions. And that's another photovoltaic building, New Jersey. And here are our sections. So this is basically a section looking from the south, so towards the north. There's our internal street. This is the south elevation. Whenever we depicted our drawings, we depicted the transparency at ground level, so never with the doors closed. And that's a section looking in the other direction, so you are cutting through your main staircase. There's the internal street, and that's the north elevation. And that's the elevation looking at the south of the building where the roof opens up, and to the north of the building where we also fold our photovoltaic glass down, and it acts as screens on that facade to these little balconies. So these are the academic offices here and here, and here is the stage at the end, and you're picking up our timber acoustic treatment. And that's the west elevation where we would absolutely screen using brick. That's where, you know, the hardness of the material becomes appropriate. And there it sits in scale relationship to the De Beers building. And then we really looked at how could this building be so many things to so many different people. And we looked at the coffee shop and how that would work and connect people from outside into the building. It was situated on the north side. Get your coffee, sit on the steps. We looked at an outdoor public address. I spoke about the stage. Here people are gathering, listening to someone outdoors. We looked at conferencing. Here the doors are closed. The building can be divided, you know, partitioned so that there are breakaway conference areas, but also 88 seats. And then outdoor learning, we looked at the top, how we could have these little outdoor learning areas. We also looked at exams, how students could 484 students could sit well placed from each other at desks. And we looked at other things, possibly weekend activities, community food markets. And then we looked at probably what I think is the most important thing for the university, which is the graduation procession. And we looked at different seating configurations. And then that's the image we'll end on. That's the hall open, people have graduated and they're leaving the building. Thank you, that's us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was extremely inspiring, and we have, I think we all are very, very impressed by what you've done. Thank you, ladies. And all the comments we're getting through, well done, hugely inspirational. Thank you for the lovely presentation, and very nice, fabulous design, excellent. It's just coming in, it's like just compliment after compliment. And I know we run very short of time. Wow, amazing. I mean, it's just fantastic. But I'd like to, and Eugene told me I'm not allowed to do this because we're running out of time, but I'd like to ask one question, which I think is on the tip of the tongues of all of us. How do you manage to do these competitions financially, because it costs money to run them? If you can maybe give us a quick answer to that, so that we understand the craft to enterprise issue on this, because there's a lot of passion that goes into what you've done. So Eugene, I'm sorry, but I very, very much think everybody wants to know that answer. Over to you, ladies.
Give it to Nina.
Okay, Nina, let's hear your answer.
I think the reason we do it, and I think the reason we do so well at them, is not because of the money. It's because we love doing it. It just sort of, it keeps us going. It's our sort of petrol. So, and I think the whole office feels the same. You know, we get so excited. It's like being students again. It's almost like a luxury for us to do it. And you know, at the end of the day, yes, it costs money, but we fit it in. You know, we sort of, our lives stop for a while, and we can't really do or think of anything else, and we love doing it. So we somehow manage. Yeah. I mean,
we're definitely the craft ones.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say.
Because we decided very early on, very clear, that we didn't want to be a big practice, because we love what we do so much, you know, and we're so privileged to have each other. So also, when you were talking about team sports, we're the partners. You didn't really talk about, you spoke about the team and the solo, but we're the partner model.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that was an exceptionally beautiful presentation, and every single comment that is coming through is like everybody's blown away. So congratulations. We're so glad we have such a powerful team of women. So now we're just waiting to see what international prizes or competitions you're going to win for us for South Africa. So we're waiting with bated breath to see what your next projects will be. Thank you, and we'll hand over to Eugene now.
Yes, great, Fiona, Nina, thank you so very much. I can't echo Gillian's words enough. That was superb. And let's say, Tim, they probably would have won ladies doubles at Wimbledon, or even men's doubles.
Definitely.
Okay, colleagues, we at the end, and I do encourage you just to stay on for another just 3 minutes as we wrap up, because we're going to be looking first of all at the take for next month. And Tim has kindly offered SAIA a benefit for a forthcoming event, so we'll deal with that in a moment. But then once again, thank you so much, Tim, Fiona, and Nina. You know, they come and they do it just for the love of it, and we appreciate it as a profession. I want to thank especially Eskom for not organizing load shedding today. And then Gillian, thank you so much for co-hosting with me, and Karina, as always, thank you for the effort that you put in to make this SAIAshare event so special. And then last but not least, once again to every one of you, thank you so much for attending. This event would not take place if SAIAshare didn't have its supporters. If you have any comments on today, well, you've already shared your comments, but any suggestions for the future, please just pop them into the questions box. Remember that this event carries a 0.1 category CPD value, which means that if you attend all 10 for the year, you will actually then have accumulated your point that you need for this year. You will receive an email. Please be patient, in about 3 weeks' time, which will give you a link to SAIA's e-portal, where you will then be able to download your certificate for this event, and that holds good for every event. Remember that previous SAIAshare events, and we will be publishing a list soon, you can access them by logging onto eCPD or on the SAIA portal, and you can access excellent lectures. Our next event happens on the first Friday of April. That's the 1st of April, and that's not a joke. That's true. We have 2 excellent presentations lined up for you again. Andre Nel will be sharing with us what architects need to know about solar and alternative sources. And I've asked Andre to speak specifically to us architects. Andre is at the cutting edge of green technology. He's an inventor and award-winning winner of green tower technology. He trained he did his master's in electronic and software engineering at the University of Pretoria, and solar training at Rennac in Germany. And so his CV tells you all about it. You will find a link to his to a video about what he can offer us. It will go out with the newsletter when we advertise the event in a few weeks' time. Then we have Padi Mabi, who's a professional architect from the University of the University of Free State. He's busy with his PhD, and Padi is going to speak to us very specifically on the pedagogy, the cutting edge learning techniques in architecture, by looking first of all at work that is being done in the Eastern Free State, and then also by focusing on the collaborative work that's being done with the Colorado State University. Don't think that you are no longer a student, you won't be interested. It is something that affects the profession, it affects the way we do things. So please log on. And then, colleagues, I'm going to end off with a little anecdote. About a man called Saul Plaatje. And I'm not sure how many of you actually know what I'm going to be telling you now. Saul Plaatje, and this came up when I was doing research for on my family history. And my grandfather's father, a stepfather, was actually a land surveyor in the 1860s, 1870s, who did work in Griqualand West, when diamonds were discovered and when Kimberley was established. And there's an interesting connection between him, but especially between Saul Plaatje and someone who influenced him greatly. And the man's name that I'm going to be telling you about is a man by the name of Frederick York St. Leger. And what's interesting about Frederick York St. Leger, apart from the fact that he was the priest of the Anglican Church in Queenstown, and Frederick York St. Leger married my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. But he was also the second headmaster of St. Andrew's College in Grahamstown between 1859 and 1862. And he was the founding editor of the Cape Times. His name, Frederick York St. Leger. Now, how do we connect Frederick York St. Leger with Saul Plaatje? We know that Saul Plaatje was a journalist in Kimberley, and he got to know Frederick York St. Leger when he was the editor and journalist of the Diamond Field newspaper in Kimberley. And it's recorded that Saul Plaatje had the greatest regard for Frederick York St. Leger. And here's the interesting fact. When Saul Plaatje's first son was born, he had him baptized Frederick York St. Leger Plaatje. His regard for him was so great. I hope you found that anecdote interesting. We're going to end this show with an offer from SAIAshare, Tim Holmes, a high performance board workshop. This information will be emailed to you. If you want to give some structure to your business, then you would be interested to enroll. There is a discounted offer for SAIAshare members. And there will be a link going out with the email to each of you. So if you connect via the link, Karina, you can move on to the next one. Then you will be offered the discounted SAIAshare rate. So colleagues, once again, thank you to all of you, our presenters and our attendees, and we wish you well. Remember, the 1st of April, 2022 will be our next presentation. Keep well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I've realized I don't want to be an architect. Thank you. Thank you for that amazing presentation. It was mind-blowing.
Thanks.
Thank you. Goodbye.